Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our last Tuesday lecture series for urban research. Morning, Antonio.
Good morning.
Hi. So this morning, as you all know, we have a lecture from Antonio Blanco Pastor, who many of you will know or recognize from part of the Thursday studio team for the MA. But apart from that, Antonio also has a role as an in-house architect at developers in Spain, which is a really unusual context for an architect to work in, and hopefully he'll elaborate a little bit on that for us. And he's doing his PhD as well, so he's a very busy man. So this morning he's talking to us quite a bit about his research, and hopefully you're happy to take some questions at the end as well, Antonio. Is that right?
Okay, perfect. Okay, so could I start?
Yeah, go for it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, so well, thank you for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. And my presentation is about garden cities as part of the doctoral thesis I'm currently doing through the case studies of Letchworth and Welling Garden City, in order to learn some principles and ideas taken from the garden city model to be updated to new rural realities, and also in order to overcome the main issues that more and more rural areas are facing now as a result of a migration process of rural communities into urban areas over time. Well, to be more specific, I will explain the impact of this phenomenon on rural communities in Spain, and I will outline some principles taken from the Garden City model in the United Kingdom to encourage the decentralization of population and means of production in the countryside, and also to create a self-financing system and design the regeneration and expansion of existing rural settlements. Well, as you can see in this slide, in 1900, most spaces within Spain didn't exceed 20 inhabitants per square kilometer, and there were no significant urban centers, but rather the Spanish territory was mainly composed of communities that maintained a certain demographic and social balance throughout the whole country. In contrast, a century later, and even now, a large part of Spanish territory is scarcely populated, with municipal densities well below those considered critical, such as 5 inhabitants per square kilometer and 10 inhabitants per square kilometer. Well, on this map, we can see how the areas below these numbers dominate the northern half of the country, giving an insight into what a demographic desert means. This situation, as well as other situations in other countries, as maybe you are struggling in your countries around the world, is the result of a globalized world in which we live, where cities concentrate most of means of production to the detriment of rural settlements. For those declining rural communities existing throughout the European map, demographic desertification is a symptom of a serious structural problems that can lead to their disappearance in a short term. As you can see, for example, in this map, the demographic distribution of Spain is facing one of the most dramatic situations, only comparable, for example, to the population distribution of Norway, despite having better climate conditions than in Northern Europe. In this context, we can find plenty of examples of declined rural communities in Spanish territory, such as these small villages located in the provinces, for example, the provinces of Huesca, Teruel, and Segovia, which share quite similar issues like population shrinkage, lack of production, shortage of amenities, bad infrastructure, no internet access, and an aging population. However, some initiatives emerged in these communities to overcome these issues. For example, in the village of Puerto Las in Huesca, one of its current inhabitants who came from the city started sharing his experience on the internet, and other families decided to move to the village thanks to the social media. In the case of Camañas in 2001, the village council decided to take action against the continued abandonment of people by fostering a campaign to attract South American immigrants. And in less than 20 years, the village went from having 3 students in the school to having 14 students in the school, which is, according to the former mayor of Camañas, the best indicator of a new hope for the village. In the case of Barahona de Fresno in the province of Segovia, in 2007, an investor purchased almost the whole village to attract tourists for tourist development, but without any significant impact until he decided to release for sale of the village in 2017 because of the crisis, of the economic crisis. In the case of Purroy in Teruel in the 90s, the inhabitants offered free housing for any young couple wanting to move to the village. And despite all the efforts of many couples who moved there, currently there are just 19 people living in the village. So far, these initiatives are not being successful enough to attract a largest number of people and create a strong and diverse community in the countryside. So the question is, how could we do it? This question raises a series of questions, such as how could we overcome this situation without any public funding? How could we foster the resilience of rural settlements to cope with their isolation from the globalized world? How could we conserve, transform, and update existing rural areas in fulfilling the needs of likely future rural communities? And how could we encourage, which is, in my view, the most important question, how could we encourage the decentralization of people and means of production into rural areas? Well, in response to these questions, my research is focused on the Garden City model, also known as the town country model, devised by Ebenezer Howard in 1898, which represented a feasible initiative to establish rural communities from scratch. Through the Garden City model, Howard proposed a new magnet, which is the magnet at the bottom of the picture, with the best features of town and country, such as, for example, beauty of nature, low rents, low rates, low prices, or field for enterprise to attract people from the cities and to move to rural communities of about 32,000 population. Among the broad theoretical spectrum that shaped the Garden City model, Ebenezer Howard was influenced by significant utopians, reformers, and philanthropists, like, for example, Robert Owen, Henry George, Thomas Spence, and Piotr Kropotkin, who provided the basis to establish model communities in the countryside. Following Howard's definition of the Garden City as a unique combination of proposals, its model is the result of overlapping strategies aimed at building model communities, living and working in ideal commonwealths, and through a cooperative economic system. According to Howard, a garden city should be composed of large parks, houses with gardens, boulevards, railway connection, and open areas for farmland and other purposes. In addition to this, Howard proposed the creation of a territorial network of garden cities connected with each other and with big cities through railway tracks, which would take the form of a social city, as he said, in a territorial scale. Through the publication of Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path of Social Reform, which is the book written by Ebenezer Howard in 1898, Howard defined the financial system of a garden city, which should rely on a cooperative system where a company, for example, a company, a community, or a municipality, would purchase would purchase the land and develop the garden city thanks to the revenues raised by rents charged for the use of the soil. Therefore, instead of having taxes or rates for public purposes, Howard's scheme would provide enough capital to build a tax-free garden city without any kind of public expenditure on its development. This way, the rents paid up by the tenants of the garden city could be deemed, according to Howard, as great rents, which would cover the interest on debentures or landlord's rent, and would refund the money spent in the purchase of the state or sinking fund, and would be devoted to public purposes or rates. Well, just 5 years after Howard proposed all these ideas through the publication of Tomorrow, a company was founded in the United Kingdom to transform 4,000 acres of farmland into the garden city of Letchworth that we have today. This first experiment was so successful that prompted the building of a second garden city in 1920, which is Welwyn Garden City. In general terms, Letchworth and Welwyn Garden City's achievement to attract people and means of production can be summarized by 3 main aspects, which are their strategies to encourage the decentralization of population and industry, their financial structure, which is the financial and land tenure system, and their urban form. Well, this first chapter, which is about the decentralization of population and industry, in the case of Letchworth, one of the most important initiatives to attract people and industry to the town came from the first manager of the company, the architect Thomas Adams, who in the summer of 1905 arranged the Cheap Cottages exhibition. Thanks to this exhibition brought a stream of people from London and the surrounding villages and towns to visit the States. And the main aim of the exhibition was to show prototypical attempts of houses for workers, a demonstration linked to the underlying aim of attracting the attention of industrialists so that they moved their factories and workforce to live there. However, the exhibition ended up attracting the general public, which was more interested in housing design than in the viability of the town. The exhibition resulted more efficient than the press in terms of publicity, allowing the company to spread its message from the written word to word of mouth across the country. And also this kind of initiative served to demonstrate the affordability of the scheme, as well as to counteract the bad publicity of several London journalists who considered Letchworth as a home for cranks, or in other words, as a home for crazy people. In addition to this, thanks to Letchworth's temporary station built by the railway company in 1905, many Londoners were able to attend the exhibition by getting on a train to Letchworth from King Cross station in little over 45 minutes. At that time, among the first people interested to come to Letchworth, there were a few retired men and women who sought merely for a house and garden, but the majority were younger people who had jobs in London. There were also some architects, doctors, lawyers, and other professional men and women looking for a new field for practice. However, the publicity on worthy housing had finally a small impact on settling population, what led to the subsequent slow development of the town during the early years. As a result, the company focused its energies to find a way to attract industrialists, to get them involved in the scheme, and therefore boost the development of Letchworth in both population and houses for the workforce. The company distributed the publicity of the state in Britain and even in France, Germany, and even in the USA. And among the first industries established at Letchworth, there were book bindings, textiles, small manufacturers, etc. And thanks to this, the workforce of the first industries of Letchworth boosted the building of houses for workers that the company needed to achieve its financial target. In addition, the industrial development by companies that came from previous locations brought skilled workers into the town, reaching 95% of population who lived and worked there in 1930. Thanks to the experience of Letchworth, the development company of Welwyn Garden City focused also its energies on publicizing the state through large notice boards on both sides of the railway, announcing London's first satellite town and providing as many houses as possible to relocate the workforce of the manufacturers that wanted to move into the new town. In addition, one of the first events at the outset of Welwyn Garden City was the Daily May Model Home Village exhibition. And as happened at Letchworth, some of the bigger industries that moved to Welwyn Garden City were British subsidiaries of foreign firms that needed to settle their branches in the United Kingdom so that they could save the cost of exporting their products from overseas and become more competitive in the British market than before. Thanks to this and the flexibility of available industrial site, just like, for example, you can see in this plan of sectorial factories, which, for example, could be merged or split depending on the needs of the kind of industry, Welwyn Garden City attracted a wide range of industry during the first 2 decades of the establishment of the town, the impact of which was even more notable than the advertisement of the industrial state in the press. Mostly the combination of both industrial and residential assets for renting or for lease was one of the most significant strategies to allow a rapid growth of people in the town, because renting at that time, even now, renting meant a more affordable way to get accommodation or start a business in a new location rather than building or buying a property on a mortgage. In 1939, the architect Jacqueline Tyrwhitt carried out a thorough survey on labor conditions, standard of living and general amenities in Welwyn Garden City, called Life and Work in Welwyn Garden City. By means of statistics and data collected in 1939, she stated that 81% of the employed residents of Welwyn Garden City worked in the town, which meant a great success of the scheme in terms of self-containment and independence from the metropolis. Apart from the workers who lived in the town, 28% of the workforce of Welwyn Garden City were commuters from outside. And all this data about the mobility of Welwyn Garden City's workforce proved the capacity of employment of the scheme, which didn't just give work to about four-fifths of the resident workers of the Garden City, but went beyond the boundaries of the Garden City by providing work for surrounding villages and towns. Whereas some groups were mainly comprised of skilled and unskilled workers, for example, specialized in metal trades, a good proportion of other groups were comprised by clerks, draftsmen, or for example, or even typists. In short, this difference between both groups of migrants was, according to Tirwitz, due to the deliberate decentralization of Londoners and the deliberate migration of those who came from depressed areas. All these circumstances led to a steady growth of population and industrial development of both garden cities, as you can see in this graphic, with several fluctuations derived from the outbreak of the First World War, the international economic crisis of 1929, and the Second World War. During the first 20 years of development, the first garden city, which is Letchworth, and is in the color of the line is in orange. The garden city attracted a steady, though slow stream of industries and people, which colonization boosted the housing development of the state. And this way, the garden city scheme became a worthy example of inner colonization in the heart of the countryside. And its success didn't only lie in the support of the company, but also in the cooperation among private and public societies. There were many shortcomings at the outcome of both towns due to the company's lack of capital to build enough houses and industrial facilities, which hampered the influx of people and industries and led to seek other alternatives that in some cases were far from Howard's tenets or Howard's principles. However, the wide and varied range of job opportunities in both towns derived from the flexibility to adapt different kinds of manufacturing facilities within the industrial estates, and the implementation of governmental housing, industrial, and employment policies boosted the migration of unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled workers from different parts of the country. Let's move on to the second chapter, which is about the financial structure, the financial and land tenure scheme. Well, the financial land tenure scheme, or the finance of in the case of Letchworth, a joint stock company was founded to develop the garden city, and its net profits were, on the one hand, divisible by way of a dividend among the members in proportion to the amount paid up on the ordinary shares, which was at that time 5% per year. And on the other hand, the surplus of the net profits of the company was saved for public purposes, such as the construction of a railway station, public buildings, hospitals, lighting, water supply, gardening, amusement, and even for the embellishment of the town. This way, the finance of the company was relied on a self-financing system without any kind of government or governmental expenditure on infrastructure. Regarding its land tenure system, the company decided to establish a dual system in which the land is held or was held in trust by the company, and the buildings were owned or rented by people. In other words, the inhabitants of Letchworth were freeholders or leaseholders of the properties, but they were not allowed to own the land in order to avoid land speculation and secure the affordability of houses. In the case of Well Garden City, after 29 years of development in the same way as Letchworth was invested and managed, the town was taken over by the government under the New Towns Act of 1946, which was aimed to establishing new towns invested by the government. Such action represented the turning point of the second garden city regarding its financial scheme, but it didn't represent a drastic change regarding its original economic and land tenure scheme. In fact, during the New Town period, Welling Garden City preserved its original land tenure scheme until the using of the Leasehold Reform Act of 1967, which still allows leaseholders to purchase their freeholds. Beyond the good intentions that gave rise to the Leasehold Reform Act of 1967, its practice in Welling Garden City and Letchworth as well led to the loss of control of the respective development corporations by retaining a low land value through ground rents, thus opening a breach that contributed to the increase of in land values and therefore to land speculation in both garden cities. However, the reinvestment model of the garden cities has prevailed in the face of adversity. Just like the original companies were aimed at reinvesting their net profits for the benefit of the local community, the current development corporation of Letchworth is working in the same direction. Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation, which was founded in 1995, has a large portfolio of residential, industrial, and commercial assets, and this portfolio generates about an annual yield of about £9 million, of which £4 million are reinvested for the development and maintenance of a free local transport network, a free health treatment center, a four-screen art deco cinema, and, for example, a garden city study center. Despite Letchworth and Welling Garden City losing their original land tenure system, their experience has heavily inspired economists like Dr. Sean Turnbull, who developed the concept of cooperative land banks in 1983. A cooperative land bank consists of, according to Turnbull, a self-financing system upon a dual land tenure system, which, if applied, for example, to the regeneration of brownfield areas or existing settlements, could become a modern version of Garden City's self-financing system. However, unlike the Garden City's management structure, the shares of a cooperative land bank should be held by residents rather than by investors, thus complying with Howard's self-governance scheme. And to do this, Turnbull proposes to distribute shares, the shares of the residents among the pioneer homeowners and future inhabitants in proportion to the area occupied and time of permanence. In addition, adult residents would have one vote each, so that the cooperative land bank could take the role of a community land trust in the form of a local government body. Well, finally, the last part of is about the Garden Cities urban form, which is an analysis through a morphological research of British cities, towns, and villages, by means of which we can understand their influence and meaning of some organic and geometrical patterns that compose the Garden Cities urban form. Well, this story begins when many aristocrats and architects developed the first examples of Rus in Urbe, or in other words, the practice of simulating the countryside within the city. One of the first interventions under the practice of Rus in Urbe took place in London in 1809. This is the first plan for Regent's Park designed by John Nash, in which we can appreciate its winding paths and water ornaments, and hidden villas in the groves, which compose the rural informality of Nash plan, in combination with the urban formality of some iconic pieces of urban planning, such as the terrace house buildings, the crescent shapes, and the circus shape. This curious morphological combination and dialogue between natural and geometrical elements of planning represent some of the most important aesthetic contributions to Garden City's environmental imagery, such as we can see, for example, in 1911, Ernst Presswich plan for Port Sunlight, which is actually an industrial garden village, and in 1920, Louis de Soissons plan for Welling Garden City, which share quite similar crescent shapes, tree-lined avenues, and circuses. Well, the inception of these cycle shapes began to take part in town planning after John Booth the Elder designed the famous circus and the Royal Crescent in Bath. Just like the Roman circus was designed in a curved shape to see the spectacle from peripheral rings towards a unique central point, Booth designed these terrace house buildings following the same synopticon model. This way, the layout of buildings had a double role. On the one hand, as a means to perceive the landscape, and on the other hand, to outline it. Well, however, such mentioned planning practices didn't just belong to urban developments, because we can find other examples of it in the planned villages of the 18th century, such as Lowther village in Westmoreland. Well, in this case, the architect Robert Adam laid out Lowther village as a square village, distributing a group of different squares connected each other along a road. Despite its radical and geometrical layout for a rural settlement, this example provided at least an alternative to build simple rows of cottages by the roadside, such as Milton Abbas in Dorset. According to Thomas Sharp, both examples represent the two different kind of model villages, or the first planned villages, which are the squared village and the rosette village. Well, just like the rosette village came from previous examples of traditional English villages, the squared village came from previous examples of traditional village rings, whether square or triangular, like in this case, which embodied the spirit of place of these rural settlements. Well, following these principles, authors such as Uwe del Price set the basis of the picturesque village as a settlement composed under the principles of intricacy, variety, and play of outline, in order to simulate the traditional rural communities across the countryside. In parallel with Regent's Park project, John Nash participated in the planning of the village of Blaise Hamlet in collaboration with George Repton, and where the haphazard layout, the irregular layout of the 9 cottages surrounding a common garden with a sand dale in the center, represents the intricacy of the hamlet. The architecture of cottages in different vernacular styles represents its variety, and the inner edge represents its play of outline, multiplying the effects of depth, surprise, and the picturesqueness of a common village ring. Well, following these precepts, we can find plenty of examples of it within the residential areas of garden cities, such as this example of Letchworth, which is Easthall, designed by Barry Parker and Raymond Unwin in 1905, or in most of the cul-de-sacs of Welling Garden City, such as Barley Croft Green, designed by Louis de Soissons in 1920. Well, these examples previously came from The studies carried out by the architects Barry Parker and Raymond Unwin in the book The Art of Building a Home, which had a direct influence on architects like Louis de Soissons in Welling Garden City to design common gardens within the residential areas, just like you can see in this picture, this cul-de-sac that you can find in Welling Garden City residential areas. In contrast, during the mid-19th century, well, in contrast to the picturesque village, during the mid-19th century, some industrialists like Titus Salt developed industrial villages using the same grid of back-to-back housing of cities. Well, despite the urban environment at Salter of back-to-back housing is too contradictory for a rural settlement, its most important contribution to garden cities was the combination of industrial, residential, and recreational developments sharing the same rural environment. However, the ring aspect on housing, for example, houses with gardens or kitchen gardens, wouldn't be implemented in industrial villages until the end of the 19th century. Before that, during the second half of the 19th century, cities began to develop other concepts of rural urbanism, but in a private manner for property speculation. Bedford Park, at 5 kilometers from London and developed by Jonathan Carr, became the first garden suburb, setting the basis of low-density distribution of houses with gardens and following the precepts of the aesthetic movement. Together with its picturesque architecture, the preservation of many mature trees, and its consequent and organic radial distribution from the station, all these aspects compose the ad hoc nature of the planning of Bedford Park that Garden City's architects used later on. We can appreciate, for example, an example of this way of planning through the master plan of Letchworth, in which the architects Parker and Unwin located the station close to in the core of the town, in between of the pre-existing park of Norton Common in the north and the pre-existing two plane trees on the south of the station. Well, through the preservation of these natural elements and the station, they created a big network with a tree-line corridor and big squares as a means to connect all the main roads from residential areas to industrial areas. Well, earlier than the beginning of the first garden cities, at the end of the 19th century, we can find similar precedents of this kind of developments and this kind of design in the industrial villages, the industrial garden villages of Britain. This is the plan for the industrial garden village of Port Sunlight, which was built by the Lever brothers nearby Liverpool. And just like in Bedford Park, the station is the beginning of the master plan, which was located close to the soap factory for distributing the production. Port Sunlight's housing scheme was composed of quadrangle of houses or blocks, and in which inner yards, the Lever brothers encouraged the community to cultivate their own crops and their own vegetables, together with some common gardens, parks, and bowling courts to reinforce the sense of community throughout the village. However, the picturesqueness of its planning turned later on into geometrical patterns in order to create a filter of magnificent boulevards with a crescent between the residential areas and the factory. Well, we can find an example of this kind of principles in the master plan of Welling Garden City, where the architect Louis de Soissons laid out some boulevards and crescents to establish a network or a green buffer between the residential areas and the factory, in order also at the same time, in order to enhance the daily walk of workers from the factory to their houses. Well, in parallel with poor sunlight, the Cadbury family, very well known in Britain for the British chocolate brand, Cadbury, founded the industrial garden village of Bourneville under the same planning precepts or the same planning principles. Its development was the result of a plan to locate the factory close to the station, which was followed by a park and recreation grounds across the Bourne Stream and houses for workers. Well, the Cadbury family and their architects thoroughly planned each recreational area to be settled across the daily flows of the residents. In this way, for example, the workers can do a sport when they are leaving the factory, whilst children play together in the park before both of them get home. Such a strong network of work, play, and live is still working in Bourneville, as for example, as I could see, as I saw for myself when I was doing my field work visiting Bourneville 2 years ago. Well, regarding the housing schemes, Bourneville's quadrangles or Bourneville's blocks are composed of large private gardens or garden spaces or kitchen gardens for each dwelling to cultivate vegetables and fruit trees instead of developing common grounds for crops, as happened, for example, in the poor sunlight quadrangles. In any case, both industrial garden villages planned the core of the housing quadrangles or the blocks for domestic operations, hidden from the surrounding public space. Within its residential areas, we can find many examples of informality, mainly in junctions, to achieve not just more distance between houses, but also a subtle perception of reception and variety which can be experienced when you are walking through these roads by discovering a sequence of different kind of mini squares surrounding the same block. Well, in the same way as the picturesque informality of industrial garden villages residential areas, the garden cities or the architects of the garden cities implemented many examples of it within their residential areas, such as this housing scheme of Letchworth, where the cluster of houses or the blocks are composed of different groups of housing typologies by providing the variety of the townscape. The junctions and village greens provide a play of outline to avoid the creation of rows and its subsequent sense of monotony. And in addition to this, the combination of both provides the intricacy of the townscape, representing the rural informality of the garden city and shaping the residential areas as a group of hamlets. All these principles can be found in Letchworth, for example, along this road where, for example, a road can provide different scenes or different pictures, street pictures, along the same road. In addition to this, some blocks have inner gardens, either allotments or recreational grounds, in order to encourage the spirit of cooperation among residents. This idea has been recently implemented in the master plan for the first expansion of Letchworth in 2018 by proposing a modern version of common areas for the community, as you can see in these pictures, such as, for example, playgrounds, community centers, allotments, parks, etc. Beyond the inner gardens, the junctions of the garden cities look like small communities scattered throughout the residential areas, thus helping to reinforce the idea of shaping the residential areas as a group of hamlets. Well, in conclusion, the garden city's urban form comes from the combination of urban and rural aspects through, on the one hand, through the practice of Rus in Urbe, such as its urban formality to perceive and frame the rural landscape. From the picturesque village, the rural informality through the combination of variety, intricacy, and play of outline within the residential areas. From the industrial village, the combination of residential, recreational, and industrial areas within the same settlement. From the suburban garden community, the implementation of private gardens, as well as the preservation of pre-existing mature trees. And finally, from the industrial garden village, the use of the cluster of houses or blocks as a residential unit with inner gardens, whether allotments or recreation grounds. In short, such mixture of different aesthetic backgrounds were the result of several attempts for introducing traditional rural aspects within urban and rural environments as a chain of overlapped revivals of rural imagery, which led to the inception of the garden city urban form, whether to frame bucolic landscapes or embody the spirit of place. Well, nowadays, both garden cities are very well, as you can see in these pictures that I took some months ago. You can see that both garden cities are very well preserved and keep their original garden look after more than 100 years of development. And despite some principles and experiments, like, for example, cooperative housekeeping or co-living, have been vanished over time, the architecture remains, as well as the public space, in some cases, for example, as you can see in this picture, invaded by many cars. Well, during my fieldwork, I had the opportunity to meet some residents, like this lady who is holding an old sketch of the cul-de-sac where she's living, thus demonstrating the high levels of conservation and preservation of the original townscape. These residents are very proud of living there, as well as their legacy, culminating with their erection of this statue, or this sculpture of Ibn S. Howard this year to commemorate the 100 years of Welling Garden City, which has demonstrated being a worth example of building rural communities from scratch, with the capability of influencing other communities to improve their economy, for example, to improve their economy, their urban design, and their lifestyle. In short, to answer these questions, to answer the questions I showed at the beginning of the presentation regarding the Spanish situation of the rural communities, the main aim of my thesis is to adapt these principles to the Spanish context in order to provide a feasible alternative aimed at providing good infrastructure, amenities, and affordable housing in Spanish rural areas. However, I still have to develop the adaptation of the garden city model to new rural realities, which will take about one more year to design a framework under which small rural settlements of today, with the problems I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, with abandoned buildings, ruins, and neglected spaces, can be redesigned and expanded in order to become prosperous, sustainable, attractive, self-reliant, and affordable communities across the countryside. Well, thank you very much for listening, and if you have any question, I'm here to answer whatever you want to ask about it. Thank you.
I unmuted it, didn't work. Thanks, Antonio, for such a comprehensive run through. So often people focus on the aesthetic or the physical qualities of Garden City. Really fantastic to see such a great breakdown of all the procedural aspects, the legislation and the processes and the way that they're governed. I think that's really interesting, and hopefully such an important point for the students to take on for their design studio work as well, that part of the remit when you're considering proposals, project proposals, is not just physically what's there, but how it's going to be managed. That was great. If any of the students have questions, I'm sure you're just formulating some ideas now, then you can put your hand up or you can type in the chat box and we'll pick up those questions. In the meantime, oh, no, we've got one already. I was going to ask my own, but we'll make way for Shiga. Hi, go ask your question.
Hi, Antonio. Yeah, your presentation is very inspiring me. I got a question. Like you talked a lot about the residential and the gardens and the industrial places and the relationship between the three of them. But for me, I just want to ask, what other potentials of the garden spaces do you think for the residential area people? Because for these days, the gardens are only used for people to have a rest, or there are a lot of benches, and the usage of the gardens only take only 10%, I think, because people only play soccer, so take the children and have a great sightseeing. But unlike those wild nature resources, like there are many wild animals be attractive to, and which can really reach people's lives. So unlike factories and also the residentials, people stay their houses for the most of the time, or the working places. But for the gardens, the usage, I think, and it should be more like a potential. So what's your opinion on, the potential of the gardens?
Thank you for the question, which is very interesting, because normally the gardens are designed just for as a landscape idea, just for landscape. But the main reason in the garden cities of designing these gardens was as a combination of something regarding aesthetics and something about resources. So, for example, some of these gardens, in these gardens you can find allotments for growing vegetables, for self-consumption, and also, or maybe for creating or establishing something like a cooperative for selling the products, or maybe to exchange some kind of network of food or vegetables, which is quite useful. So I think that apart from being something that could be useful as something to see or something to, to embellish the townscape, should be something, at the same time, should be something useful for resources, or maybe, for example, if you are growing fruit trees, maybe, for example, the bone of the fruit trees could be used for any kind of energy, for example, biomass or something like this, So I think that if you try to establish as more synergies as possible, or as more functions as possible regarding the use of the garden, I think that that's the main thing that should be, focused to improve, and not just the landscape, but also, maybe something regarding employment, or maybe for the spare time, for exchanging the products.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And also, so despite of the village and the townscape area, but I know it may be beyond your research, but what do you think of the urban space when the road, the landscape inside the road? Because people think when the roads are really wide, and so it's really not really aesthetic or really good to have a look at. So they put the green spaces inside the road and in the middle of the road, like to
in between the
So so I think the landscape inside the really wide road, there are only for sightseeing or the view, but people have to take care of the green spaces and really consuming the money and also the energy. But there are not any other uses. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, as you said, when you see some landscape or some trees in between, for example, roads, it's much better if, for example, this space in between, if you create something for pedestrians. For example, in the case of Letchworth, you can find Broadway, or in the case of Welling Garden City, you can find, for example, Parkway, which is a wide pedestrian space with gardens. And you said that is more, maybe that kind of ideas could be more useful for the maintenance of the gardens, but at the same time it's more enjoyable, to walk through gardens instead of walking through, a gray space. Or it's something, the main idea of the architects who designed the garden cities was to embellish the daily flows of the residents. So if you have the opportunity of you have the a wide road to do this, it's much better for this.
Thanks for your question. Thank you. We have limited time left before our next lectures, but Tao also has a question, so we should let him ask that. Tao, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
I saw your presentation. Some slides mentioned like the public transportation like station. So I want to ask how is the green structure cooperates with the public station to create a green network to encourage public use public transports, and
So thank you for your question. Regarding the connection or the relationship between the green network or the green aspects of the garden city and the station, is that normally the stations you can find in many garden cities and even in new towns, and the stations are in the middle, in the core of the community, and at the same time is you can find there the main green infrastructure, very close to this infrastructure. So the thing is that the station is part of the locations to be used during the daily flows of the residents when they have to go, for example, from the residential areas, for example, to London, other places. So it's part of the daily flows. So that's why the stations are part of the green buffers or the green network of the garden cities and industrial garden villages.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Wow. We have like 2 minutes left, which is almost nothing. But I really desperately want to ask you so many questions myself, Antonio, because I think so. There's a load of stuff, isn't there? First of all, about like density and land value, and how and where are the places where you can do this kind of thing, right? Because it's never going to be a central location, like somewhere high land value next to an existing urban center. So that's like, I don't think that's not really a question. It's just a consideration for students, I suppose, especially because, of course, on Thursday, we're jumping in with our financial feasibility workshop.
Good, that's fine.
So, like, this will be an opportunity maybe to discuss it more with you then in that context. And also, I think there's like an interesting comparison to be done maybe between Garden City movement, which is more like very well established, quite historical and very enduring, like still relevant today, and New Urbanist movement.
New Urbanism, yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
But both like looking at satellite developments away from existing urban centers usually, and like at a relatively low density, and also have like a really comprehensive conception of how a whole settlement should be organized with like a commercial core, and then all the other functions around the periphery. So I don't know if in like 1 minute you can maybe comment on that.
No, I totally is. The new urbanism movement is well, the new urbanism movement took some ideas from the garden cities, as you can see in some of the principles of the new urbanism movement. Something about the walkability of the townscape. There's something about the garden aspect, or the healthy environment. So I think it's quite similar, the kind of precepts. And I don't know if, because I saw Gonzalo is maybe is the next one who is going to present. Gonzalo.
Yeah.
Gonzalo is an expert on. He's an expert in new urbanism, so maybe he could explain something about it, about the connections, because I see a lot of connections between garden city movement and new urbanism, and because of when I was reading about it, I read that some principles are quite similar.
Yeah, that's interesting to draw out a bit more. I think for any students that are interested in this sort of development, they would be well served to familiarize themselves with both kind of both texts or movements.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we should unfortunately leave it there, although I think there's so much more we could discuss. But
yeah, I know.
Like Antonio will be around on Thursdays as well, so feel free to talk to him then if you've got any more interest in his research, or perhaps in your other role in Spain. So thanks so much, Antonio.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lucy. Have a nice day. Bye.
So next on our agenda this morning is some presentations and discussion with some of the course alumni. Hi, Gonzalo. And
hi, Lucy. How have you been?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine here. It's little cold here in Bogota, but it's fine.
Yes, funnily enough, it's not very warm here either. We are enjoying the grey, wet winter.
I will guess that.
So let me just bring up the schedule for this session. Bear with me 2 seconds. I think that Simon has been coordinating with you, hasn't he?
Sorry, can you repeat again, Lucy?
I think Simon has been coordinating with you, hasn't he?
Coordinating, you mean?
Yes.
My dissertation was from email.
Yes, no, sorry, you're misunderstanding. I think our connection is a little bit bad, but hopefully it will hold out. I think, so I was expecting Simon to join us.
My connection is a little bad. I can't hear you.
Oh, no, Iwa, I got it mixed up. It's not Simon.
That's okay. Yeah, it's me.
Hi, Iwa.
Hi.
Hi,
Gonzalo. Good to meet you.
Hi, Iwa. Nice to see you here.
Good to see you. Should I go ahead with the introductions? I think we've got Gonzalo going first, but then we've got Busra Berber in half an hour, and then Adnan and Salman Rehman finishing off the session at 12 o'clock.
Yeah, great. That sounds good. And I hope the students take the opportunity to really quiz you, Gonzalo, and the other speakers, because as alumni, of course, you've been in exactly the position that they're in now, trying to figure out what to do for a dissertation, how it might lead on to other things afterwards, so they can pick your brains.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with introducing you, Gonzalo. So Gonzalo Sanchez Garcia received the MA degree with distinction in architecture and urbanism in 2020. He also received the specialization degree and MA degree in urban design from the National University of Colombia in 2011. In 2012, he joined Universidad Piloto de Colombia, where he served as tutor in architecture and led a research group involved in urban design methods and architectural pedagogy. His research topics include design codes, smart growth, the new urbanism tools. During his career, he stayed at the Vienna University of Technology and the University of Manchester. He has received recognitions to his academic career, including the Colfulturo Scholarship and the bachelor degree with honors. He has extensive experience in planning and development of architectural and urban projects in the private sector, design competitions, construction supervision, and budgeting. He's presently associate professor and coordinator of urbanism department at the Santo Tomas University in Boyaco in Colombia. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to you, Gonzalo, if you could start sharing the screen and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Lucy, for having me today. It's always a pleasure to meet MSA community. I have a new opportunity to talk about my research, my work. And let me one second and share my screen right now. Can you see my screen?
We can, yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thanks again for the invitations. Basically, the idea here is I will deliver a brief presentation about my dissertation findings. I will provide you some insights about how was the process, about how I can choose my method, the topic. Basically talking about my experience at at MSA University. Okay, my presentation will be divided in two parts. The first part, I will explain you the research body. In general, addressing the research problem, the aim, the research method, and some examples about the analysis and now outcomes that I got. At the second part, I will explain you my research process, most about the experience of my research, maybe some weakness and some things some reflections basically about how was the research in general. Let's start with the first part, but before explaining the research, I will provide you briefly the geographic context where my research take place. It is in Colombia. Colombia is located at South America continent. Basically, Colombia is the main entrance to all connections that we have on the continent with other parts of the world, such as United States and Europe. It means that, for example, if you want to travel to Brazil, in some cases you need to scale first in Colombia, probably in Bogota, that is the capital, and move on then to Brazil on other countries from the continent. Colombia is bounded by Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, and Mexico on the northern part. The official language is Spanish. The population is almost 50 million of population here. The area is around 1,140,000 square kilometers. It is almost 3 times the area of United Kingdom. It is bigger. It's a rich country in terms of culture and natural resources. The climate is between ocean and Mediterranean climate. Depends of depends of the part of the country where you are. The average temperature in terms of the Caribbean areas are 24 Celsius degrees. Specifically, my cases study was the capital is Bogota. It is Bogota with a population of 9 million approximately. The area is 1,500 square kilometers. The climate, it's ocean climate general. In this case, particularly, the climate is different compared to other parts of the country by the position in the position related to the sea level. We are approximately 2,700 meters above the sea levels. It means that we have dry and rainy seasons over the year. In some, I will say that it's similar the weather to compare with London, for example, from September to December, but it's quite sunny and warm at the beginning of the year. But we don't have seasons, and as you will see here at the section, we have the Easter Hills that are quite remarkable, and the landscape it helps the legibility of the place. We are at the valley. It is the urban areas, including some wetlands and the river at the west part, as you will see on the map. Okay, so let's start with the research. I will explain you first the main concepts of my work. The first one is the gay communities. Basically, a gay community is a group of dwellings that are surrounded by walls or fences that commonly are monitored by 24 hours by control systems. I am aware that gay community is not exclusive of Colombia, or definitely not in Bogota, not only in Bogota. It is a phenomenon that is included in everywhere, in many countries and cities around the world. But there are some singularities that make of gay communities a special character on this place. I will explain you about this later on. The second concept is the design codes. Basically, a design code is basically a rules in terms of planning, but in this case, it is a new approach that looks for deliver a quality, design quality by controlling the urban environment, controlling the urban form, and trying to figure it out how will be the best place to a specific community. This kind of codes are good in terms to inform the design vision of the place, but also some policies and some strategies that are included in a master plan or any other development framework. The design scopes in general are being studied in the last decades. They can help to deliver design quality, but also are some rules that are easy to read in general. These graphics show you how, for example, will be some examples about how the power of design codes, if the power of the design codes in terms of how will be the build environment that the design code can create. For example, when you can see here in these examples that most of them, these graphics come from the Access Design Guide in England. That is a precedent example that I have here for you. There are some evidence that support their potential and deliver design quality. How the design codes can help to coordinate the development process in terms of what is at the end the place that you want to build. It is basically the question. The design codes are not the design codes are not exclusive from a specific area, a specific geographic locations. There are different codes everywhere. I have to say that the code, every city has regulations and codes. But in terms of design codes, there are some precedent examples, for example, in Australia, in the United States and England, for example, here, where in 2 years ago, I remember when I was studying at MSA, the City Council launched the National Design Guide. That is something that they are implementing, I guess that they are implementing now. And there are other precedents like the SS Design Guide that talking about how the experience of the design codes the country has. But for my research, I will focus on new urbanism, that is the form-based codes. Basically, is the American version of this topic. Interesting on it, but the experience not only by the codes, but also by the connection with new urbanism tools and principles. That is something that we are implementing right now in some states, in some places in the United States, such as Miami, Cincinnati, Florida, and other parts, that talking about the experience of this topic here. So this is a diagram that shows how the form-based codes are connected with new urbanism. Basically, new urbanism are in the center. New urbanism looks for some important principles in terms of how you can improve the quality of living for people around the world. For the new urbanism looks for well-designed neighborhoods via including connectivity, small blocks, quality of civic space, and other features that are important for this. The important here for form-based code is the legislation body that can create this from form-based codes. Basically, form-based code is the method. Basically, is the legislation body that compromise this kind of qualities here. It is close related as well with the community vision, and it is quite fundamental in terms of what is the community engagement into the process. But it's not something like I don't have enough time for explaining this, but it's basically about the form-based code and how they can compromise these features. This is an example about how the zoning, a comparison between the traditional codes that are focused on the land use. You use a land code, for example, this will be the result. It's nothing related to the form in general in terms of urban design. There are some guidelines that are quite helpful for the try to encourage a better appearance for in terms of production for in relation with the streetscape, and different degree to try to look for the ground floor activation as well. But the form-based code, from my view, is a comprehensive approach that looks for not only manage the public space, but also include the buildings and the composition of the block, including services, uses, and other things that tend to try to create a better environment, or try to make some relationships between the policies and the design production. Form-based codes, as usually different, there are some different examples about that, but there are some chapters or categories that the form-based code create some standards. For example, here, this is the block where we have, for example, some graphics that show how what will be the code, the regulation. This picture show how the form-based code are being implemented in Cincinnati, in the United States. There is something that research that is still going about what will be the potential of these codes, but this is something that is happening right now in terms of how they are implemented. There are other things. There are civic space, how we can manage basically the function of the road, how you including the landscape features, the movement for pedestrian vehicles, and so on. And the other important thing that is for me is quite remarkable is the Frontage Standards. It does include a reflection about what would be the relation between the outdoor and indoor spaces, and what would be the interface, how you can manage in terms of design the interface between public and private space. It is something that is quite helpful in terms of how the design code can manage that. Moving now, okay, I explain you this to talk about the research problem. Maybe it was the introduction, but I will say that the research problem addressed the gated clubs or gated communities that create symbolic limits between dwellers and non-residents by highlighting social differences, prevent social interaction, and promote discriminatory behaviors. It is quite, you can see in the picture, it is spreading a sprawl of gated communities in Bogota and in other cities. And the problem is not the gay community itself. Maybe for residents or people that live in there is good, but it's not the same for people that live in the surrounding areas that that is create a harmful environment in terms of the lack of services, lack of public transportation, another kind of activity on the street that is not good in terms of create a community as a city in terms of city scale. This is a picture from Bogota, when the west part, as you will see, this is the situation. This is also I made this map. It's a mapping that is a reference that show you how the households living in gay communities have increased in the recent years. The colored ones belongs to the gay communities location, as you can see are higher in terms of you compare with the traditional fabric that we are here. But yeah, this is something that even is still going, still growing out. Some communities still are building right now, and I would like to see what will be the situation in 5 or 10 years. Okay, this is basically the situation that we have. In terms of the pedestrian view, what is the result? It is basically this one that you will see there is not activity on public space. There are some issues behind of what insecurity issues in terms of there is not activity on the street. Even in some cases, there is not relationships with the environment, such as this one that is a river that is a limit, is a boundary for gated community, but it doesn't matter basically for the design. The buildings are the same. There is no differences, and in some cases the distance or the space between buildings are not enough to get sunlight or to get ventilation in terms of the living, the design that we had in the gay community. This is basically the situation that we had. There are different gated communities. We have some single houses. We have tall buildings, but in general, there is the situation that we have. There are many issues behind this, but I will explain you this in other moment. Okay, according to this, my main idea, the main aim or goal in my research was try to compare or try to understand how form-based codes of the design codes from the American version will be helpful to help to develop, try to understand how the form-based code will be helpful for gated communities in terms of regulation body. This idea was basically try to make some comparisons in terms to understand in what extent the gated communities regulations agree or disagree with form-based codes approach. It is basically was my idea, the main objective that I have. It is the methodology was basically a comparative analysis between these worlds. When we have this comparison to try to figure it out on similarities, try to understand the differences, and obviously the opportunities to get from one another. It is something that I addressed. I try to put in I try to use some quantitative analysis, including system information system, geographic information system. That it was helpful for this as well. It was in my Studio B, and I made some comparable tables and illustration trying to show this, explain this more easier. This is some comparison. This was like my dissertation work, just some examples, including the gay community blogs in Bogota, for example, comparing with blogs in Utah and United States. I made some tables comparing the situation, including, for example, here, the maximum block length, including the the regulation in Bogota, in regulation in terms of gate communities, and the degree or similarity with form-based codes. Here is none, doesn't exist, low, moderate, or high, and some observation about. It was most about qualitative analysis. It's not more quantitative, but it was good to understand this idea. The other example is the frontage standards. Here I compare the frontage the streetscape, basically the idea how is the relation with the street. And surprisingly, I can see that in terms of gate community, there is nothing about the frontage standard. There is nothing that can regulate this production of design. But definitely in form-based code, we have some experiences, some code regulation that looking for seek to produce a better ground floor relationship.
Sorry to interrupt. All right, your conclusions now. I'll let you.
Yeah. These conclusions basically is I think that the private-public interface is good in terms of how we can provide a strategy to link the public and private interfaces in gate communities. I think that form-based code might meet the local needs through replacing or adding base-based regulation as a complement. It's not replaced totally. We can complement the system policy framework. Other thing is the quantity of documents. We have a lot of documents in terms of gated communities, but I think that we can create a more comprehensive graphic format for create a better regulation understandable for citizens. This is. I will move on quickly to my research process.
I'm just gonna remind you to leave a few minutes for questions from the students.
Okay, yeah. It is. I try to do the fast. Sorry. Okay, this is basically how I chose the topic. Basically, was I used to live in a gay community. I always wondered how I can change this kind of environment. But in 2012, I was at the Universidad Piloto de Colombia. I lead a research about the form-based codes. And this was the precedence where I took the decision to make a relationship with form-based code, a gated community. It was about my experience. The other was how I choose my method. Basically, it was started with my literature review, including form-based codes, the quantitative factor, qualitative factors. But in this search, I picked up a reference. This was a case of the study, including some form-based codes and how it's implemented in United Arab Emirates. It is a precedent example for me because provide me the method. It will provide me. You can see this table. It is similar that I made, but I made obviously some changes for that. I try to move into my proper research. At the end, okay, I have some recommendations for you in terms of your dissertation, your future work. Reading journal articles as much as you can. It is my best advice. Making a work plan before starting, it is always good. Take some rest if the writing does not flow. Sometimes it's difficult writing and try to move in on your research. But you need to take time to think, do other things you don't want to write anymore. It basically motivate yourself by meeting partial goals. It is good, and it is a personal view. But I think that keep in mind of that a dissertation is an extended writing treatment of a subject. It is not necessarily a piece of new knowledge. It's something that my tutor told me in the past, and it was helpful for me to understand that it's just a piece of work, it's a reflection, it's a dissertation about something, a subject, but that's all. It's not necessarily something, about the knowledge PhD or something like that. Basically, it was my presentation. It was sorry for the time, but thank you so much.
Thanks for that. I think maybe we might have time for one question. Okay, so Rosianna Craggs, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? Thank you.
Hi. I was just what I put in the chat box. So form-based coding is a very top-down approach. So therefore, I was wondering, do you think that the designers have enough understanding of the urban space from a human perspective and the experiential qualities of it.
Yeah, it is there are some constraints about for this code, even in your literature. Some architects even say that the code constrains the creativity, constraints maybe in most cases, as you say, most this connection with humanity in terms of the urban living. But there are is something important behind the design code that is the community engagement. There are idea that you need to make some meetings with the people, with community that is your objective community, to get some like consensus. Yeah, try to figure out what would be the place that they can vision, like a vision of the place, and try to work with that. Yeah, is basically. But yeah, I agree with you that I think the research is still going, the outcomes is still going. It's something that is not just for graphics. And yeah, but I expect that in some years, probably in United States or in England right now, we can see the outcomes. But yeah, it is something that is important, as you said.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. And thank you for your presentation, Gonzalo. That was also quite illuminating, and I hope that the students really benefited from listening to your experiences going through it. I think we're perfectly on time, so we're going to move on to Busra Berber for her presentation. Hi. So Busra is an architect and researcher based in London and Istanbul. She graduated with a distinction in architecture and urbanism from the University of Manchester. She has worked as a research assistant at Architectural Practices and is presently a research candidate at the Architectural Space and Computation and Phil PhD program at the Bartlett. Busra also conducts side projects like being UCL's sustainability ambassador at Camden Council and creating on-site watercolor sketches collections. Busra, over to you if you could share screen.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for your introduction. I'm trying to share it. But there is some technical problem here. I cannot see my presentation for the sharing screen. Let me try again. No, it is not working. I have no
There
idea.
We go.
No, not this. This is an old one from old meeting, so I cannot see my current screen. Let me try again.
Please.
I can share the whole screen, then I can show in this way. I think you can see my current presentation, right?
Yeah, I can see it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to give a talk or the MA students in this year as an alumni from 2018. You already introduced me. I will take from there. Firstly, today I will state my story shortly. Then I will present my research project, what I'm doing now, currently at UCL. Also, I would like to talk about shortly the competition project in Turkey we have awarded with a purchase prize. Last year it was urbanism scale, so I thought it is good to show how we proceed such a big scale for a competition project. Firstly, I'm from Turkey. I studied in Poland as well. Then I continued my MA graduated, then I continue my PhD at Facade. Also, I conduct side projects such as ambassadorship, like volunteering projects. My research project is about sensory experience in human-building interaction. And I focus on museum environments and gallery spaces. I would like to direct my first impressionist questions when I proposed this research project to my supervisor when I emailed them. Have you ever experienced an immersive installation? Have you seen same space in different digital modifications? Have you feel occupation on your senses by a space? I just want to remind you how was the feeling, how was the architectural environment by senses, how sensorial attachments and digital effects improve the experience. And plasma is one of my how can I say, the impressions in this journey. And he says an architectural work is not experienced as a series of isolated retinal pictures, but it is fully integrated material, embodied and spiritual essence. He has a lot of written works about sense in architecture. I would strongly recommend you to have a look. And he extremely says the architecture is not all about the material. There is virtual things surround our environment. And I would like to take you a virtual tour and immersive installation to talk more about them. So this is a kind of what that immersiveness is very wide thing to talk about. It can be one point of the room just by a small. You can add a sensory point, or it can be a room full of screen and sound, or it can be a building which can be like arranged circulation in between this type of elements which are like approaching to your perceptions from five sense. For example, in Van Gogh Alive, which is located in Birmingham last year, was included big screens and sound. The sound has a different technology, which is 8D, so you can feel the close sound or far away from somewhere else. And the color, fragrance, also the environment was sent spatially. It was the spatial experience. You are in the experience, like a big part of experience. And my aim in my research, how we engage with this kind of embedded space and how they improve the architecture. The most importantly, how we can capture user experience to develop a framework for the future exhibition designs. The most importantly, architecture designs. This is another case study, same immersive experience in York. St. Mary's Church building an envelope is hosting the same exhibition, and we can see how the architectural environment is important to change this experience. We can see massive change from the Birmingham Hippodrome. And as you can see, people are in a part of exhibition, so we can see the video from that. Unfortunately, these were last year's, but I'm using for a case study still. But you can follow up the new one in London still on for if you want to experience in person. In my research, I want to compare this type of exhibitions in different buildings from a human perspective and how we interact between them. I thought it is good to involve the videos to give the impression more to you. Also, we can say a sensory journey through the maze like studio space, making you question perception, time and space. We can recognize our perception and time spent has been changed by the environment and installation in this type of exhibition. Another example is, as I said, some are fuel building experience. So in the Manchester War Museum, there is a main exhibition hall with surrounded with huge presentation walls. The huge projections are in use to create this immersive environments with sound effects. And it shows war stories and include the people in the stories thanks to this arrangement. Another thing, for example, it was in London, the Strat exhibition. It was included sound, wind, and temperature and texture to interact with user. It was giving an opportunity to experience the space with sense for the visitors. So the research summary was in this way. I will follow with the competition project, which is totally different scale. It was in group project, and I'm thinking my MA has contributed to develop this project extremely. Also, it was interesting experience to work as a group from distance, like from different countries and cities in the middle of pandemic last year. So the location was near Istanbul in Turkey, which is an ancient city from 14th century Ottoman term. It was endpoint of the Silk Road, so it was a very important area. And then our main focus was the red area to develop. This was the council competition, so they asked to how to develop this historical area to make improve the public use. And our proposal was this. improve the green connections. Also, the Bursa is famous one for the greenness, which is like we start from background research. We search a lot about the historical patterns, how was the development, and we the fascinating hand drawn maps we have found, we have impressed from them, and then we have seen the same area in this way here. And then the historical background help a lot us to decide and follow the narrative. This was the current situation. We can see the how can I say, the modern usage is not very respectful for the historical surface. Then we have analyzed what we found and the development over the years, over the history, and we find out the main points of the area to make it simple. Look in this diagram. There are certain roads and connecting important landmarks between this area, and then our area was in the middle of this junction. This was one of the messy diagram to find out the main decisions, and the LIN's 5 elements help a lot to sort it out and analyze the characterize of the current situation and how to develop what is the possibilities and advantages of this area. We have created main concepts by discussing on the previous diagram. The first decision basically was the taking the main road under the ground, and then some of the writings are Turkish because it was a competition from Turkey. Sorry about that. And then we have decided the main axis, and then green corridor was the main idea. Another important thing, zoning the area. We have found 3 focus areas as courtyard, square, and water square, we have called from the previous analysis. This was a previous sketch to find out and decide how we can arrange in the scale. When we follow its design, the end process was this. It was really huge and detailed project, so we had to work as a group, and we have tried to make it respectful to the history, but also make it an envelope for the modern public interactions. We have also asked, we have been also asked by the competition management to redevelop this historical bank building as a public space. A part of our team has proposed after discussions with this was the main idea, but also part of this building, a courtyard. And this courtyard was connected with the building ground floor. Also, it was connecting from the main square to courtyard square. And detailed organization for this, for this building. And also the material choose and the rehabilitation solutions for the existing parts has been proposed. A part of us was located in this city, and they prepared these physical models when we ended up the main decisions. brief summary from different scale of the projects. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks for your presentation. Yeah, I mean, to the students, this is your opportunity to get some insights. So please don't be shy.
Very quiet.
Hopefully it's because they're thinking of really pointed and acute questions to ask you. David, would you like to unmute? And...
Hi, Buzz.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, David.
Hi.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Rock and roll. Bit older.
Wow. Great to see you again.
Good. Yeah. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
I really, well, you know, I would like those kind of, media projects wrapped around solid objects. So I just wondered if you could just say, what you got, what came out of that management of projected images. It's almost like renders onto renders, isn't it? Yeah. So was there anything else you can say that was that has made you kind of given you an insight or other, from your these display areas?
Actually, yeah, they were just commercial filmings.
Yeah.
But actually, I was just exploring what is going on in UK regarding the immersive environments, and I found about them. And also, I visited them personally, which was impressive. For example, I can compare the being in person and watching this film. It is also another outcome how they are affecting our feelings and emotions. For example, when we watch the film, as you say, like a media on media, it is still only visual, isn't it? We cannot touch the doll. For example, the York church wall, we cannot watch. We cannot see the projections on us when we watch the film. But when we are in there in person, it is totally different. You can decide also time spent. The film has limitation of the film timing.
Yes.
And it is only their perspective. But when you are in person in this environment, you can spend time as you wish, and you can follow your own road, and you can examine what you want and look at and enjoy.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I am on the same page with you.
Yeah, it's just like a media meets 3D objects, and it kind of it drives you forward because it's not easy to grasp. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it is really huge challenge perceive if
Yes.
they like or if they enjoy, if they're bored. And for example, this type of like first two examples, Van Gogh Alive, is impressing us, probably making happy us, because the environment is full colorful and the story is thoughtful and we love the Van Gogh. It is impressive. But the second example, Manchester War Museum, is a story which is derived from the war time. So it is designed for giving you the wartime feelings. Actually, after this exhibition, probably people don't want to come back again, or don't want to be alone in the exhibition. This type of effects, planned, designed or undesigned effects, they are producing. And for now, my aim, how I can capture this emotion objectively with sensors, like tools.
Very nice. Yeah.
Hope I can.
This practice selects audiences, doesn't it? You know, you're going to always, you're always going to divide up audiences for this type of thing. Anyway, very best of luck, with your career.
So
fabulous, really, really impressive. And you've got another question, I think, coming through.
Oh
so
yeah, I see.
Have a good day. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Gonzalo, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Iwa. Sorry for the time in my presentation, but I want to ask to viewers,
Hello, Gonzalo.
Hello. I would like to know, or maybe to the audience here, what was the difficulties or challenges that you encountered over the research? What is the most remarkable for you?
Actually, firstly, I am a designer background person. I am attempting to use technical tools. So it is required to collaborate with technical people who can also be happy to collaborate with you for their career. So it is hard to find this type of people. Still, I am creating network.
Was the difficulties or challenges that you encountered over the research? What is the most remarkable for you?
Actually, firstly, I am a designer background person. I am attempting to use technical tools. So it is required to collaborate with technical people who can also be happy to collaborate with you for their career. So it is hard to find this type of people. Still, I am creating network. This is one. Second, I am trying to conduct my research in the wild environment. It is not laboratory. I'm not creating my own immersive room at the school or a part of UCL. I'm going to immersive experience places in the COVID situation, which also they are, it is really unpredictable environment. As last year, they closed the museums for months and I couldn't go them. It is hard to schedule all the case study times and observations in the COVID time. Also ethics, another problem in the COVID, because museum doesn't want to, how can I say, have more people and disturb people when their experience is ongoing on. This type of things, unfortunately, but hope to overcome them.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's clear.
Thank you so much. If we don't have another question, maybe all that's left is to thank you, Busra, for your presentation. And
thank you so much.
Thank you. So have we got
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing good.
I don't know, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself and your practice, um, as well as carry out your presentation.
Sure, sure. So basically, my name is Salman, and my brother's name is Adnan. He's going to be joining us shortly. So we joined Manchester School of Architecture for the course MA Architecture and Urbanism in the year 2018, and we graduated in the year 2019. So we both are basically twins, and we started studying architecture together, both bachelors, and then doing our masters together. And then coming back to Pakistan, we decided to actually start our own practice. With a few opportunities that came our way, we decided that it's a good time to indulge into basically our own practice and try looking at opportunities that come our way during this post-pandemic or during pandemic period. So we've done our bachelor's from Pakistan, Karachi, where we are based at the moment. And after our master's, when we came back, we started this company by our own name, or a design studio by our own name called um, Rahman and Rahman. So I'll ask Adnan to basically continue from over here. How do I
You're both on mute.
Hi, but there seems to be an issue with Adnan's. He's not able to join at the moment.
Yeah, I think I saw that. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So just give me a second. I'll ask him to reconnect so that he can.
I think he's just come back in. Hi, Adnan.
Yeah, but the problem is that I cannot seem to unmute.
Ah, okay.
So he's basically sort of speaking through my.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just give us a second. Sorry.
Yep, of course. Please bear with us all.
Yeah, can we just join and just sit together and do it like from one?
I mean, it's up to you guys, really. Yeah,
Okay,
of course.
okay, sure.
We have no issue with that.
All right. Just a second then.
into that.
Yeah.
You know, at the top of the screen, there's the camera, the microphone, and the box with an arrow.
Box with an arrow. Yeah.
If you click on that,
only meeting presenters and organizers can share.
oh, is that because you're a guest, maybe?
Yeah.
Could you, is there any way you could, don't know, we haven't come across this before. Could you sign into Microsoft, maybe, and then come into the meeting?
Okay. Sure. We can do that.
Thanks, Rosianna. Have I just proved to everybody my age?
Hi, Iwa. They should be able to use the button next to leave, the little like arrow button.
They did try that.
Oh.
But they're signing in.
The guest thing shouldn't matter. The only other thing I can think of is if all else fails, they could send you their presentation and you could share it.
Yep. share content button working
Yeah,
now?
it is showing, it is aligned to share the content. Yeah, it is.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, great, great, great. Can you see the screen as well?
Yep,
Okay, great.
it's your Windows Explorer window.
Can't you see the presentation?
No, I can see your Windows Explorer.
You can see the Windows Explorer. Okay.
There we go. Yep,
Okay,
that
great.
works. Over to you guys.
Okay, so yeah, so we're going to start off with the presentation now. Sorry for the disturbance, the initial part of figuring out. So as Salman explained earlier, we are basically brothers and twins as well. So we are same batch. We have done same bachelor's program, and then we went for the same master's in 2018 to Manchester School of Architecture for architecture and urbanism. After the entire experience of MSA, which was amazing, we got to travel, which unfortunately during the COVID times is a bit difficult, but there was a lot to learn, and there was a lot to understand globally and internationally as well. We came back to our home country as Pakistan, and we started off with our own design firm, Rahman Design Studio. The name is pretty clear as to why we went with this particular name, because it was a partnership between two of us, and we just wanted our architecture to be responsible and sustainable as a basis of understanding. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to share a few of the projects we did after we came back. It includes some of the competitions. It includes a few of the projects that are under process being constructed at the moment, and a few small projects which have been completed as well. So, like we said, we're based in Karachi, Pakistan. It's a quite a big of city. Last consensus says it had a population of 20 million in 2020. So it's a vast city, and there are all sorts of densification and diversification, and it's a seaport as well. It's like Pakistan's largest seaport, so the trading is also a very major part of Karachi, and there's a lot of job occupation. So you would see a lot of rural urban migration in Karachi. So yeah, it's a very heavily dense metropolitan city of Pakistan. So the first design competition we're going to share, it's a school design competition. It's an Akuwat competition. Akuwat is basically an NGO, non-profit organization, which basically teaches the poor people in a country called Faisalabad. It's all over Pakistan, but this particular competition was in a rural area of Faisalabad, where they wanted to create a housed community and also a school for the primary students, having a capacity of around 1200 people to 1000. So it was like 1000 to 1200 of different standards. So it's a pretty big complex, and the requirements were pretty clear that they wanted a sustainable approach, and they wanted an easy maintenance and more zero carbon or more environmental friendly architecture. So we proposed a structure that was expanded over around 20 acres, which is around, I would say, 20,000 square yards. And these were few of the, if you could see, few of the programs that were required. So there was a mosque, and there were teacher rooms, a toilet, courtyard, admin, assembly hall, and then the major aspect of our particular design was the tube well reservoir. So this is like a water body where our project culminated, which is the number 11. So this was the entrance, and the culmination was this water body. It's tubal. It is more of an underground water, which is being pumped from underground, and then it is used for the greenery and
the daily activities. So the whole sort of concept of this project was to employ, local techniques and local craftsmanship and work techniques. So there's a lot of use. There's a lot of use of local materials in the overall scheme, and the idea was to come up with a master plan for a community living and community learning campus, which can basically employ the local crafts to actually come up with a very sustainable and a very low carbon footprint solution. In terms of the overall planning, there was a threshold created in terms of a street, and then the street sort of dissected into intimate courtyards, which then became the collecting spaces, as an example shown in the image in this slide, basically. So it became like a collecting point for various sort of activities happening within the school and the housing campus. Again, some of the programs were made in a way that they sort of had this opportunity to spill out into these courtyard spaces. So these courtyards became the main sort of organizational principle within the whole master plan of the proposed solution.
Also, if you could see, these are all naturally ventilated. The brick material, which was indigenous material of Islamabad, was used, and it allowed to create perforations, and it allowed to create openings throughout the entire scheme, so that all these small blocks of spaces would be naturally ventilated rather than being artificially and air conditioned. So this was the small library space that was also flowing down into a courtyard space, and it was open throughout, so you could enjoy the views while you were studying throughout the day. This was like assembly code, which could also allow to become a very different sort of playground area for different students of different ages. And this one thick wall created a threshold, which Salman talked about earlier, and it allowed to create a diversion between public spaces and private spaces, because these were the classrooms and these were more of like a public space for the students. So this competition happened in February of 2020, and we won the first prize for the competition, and we were awarded the project, but unfortunately, due to the lack of funds, it is still underway and it hasn't been built yet. The next project is a small zero carbon competition. It was basically, the idea was to create a small school in any particular area. It was an exemplary model school that the techniques could be used further on in the villages and in the interior parts of the country.
So again, the idea was to come up with a modular solution using local techniques and local materials, which could then be replicated wherever necessary throughout the rural areas of the country. Again, the problems faced in many of the areas are quite similar, which is the idea that there's not a lot of resources available, not a lot of people available or manpower available, or actually the money available to employ in these areas, and the solution had to be something which can just be done in a very local manner to ensure its sustainable growth throughout the rural areas.
So we chose an interior part of Sindh, which is also where Karachi is located, the province of Sindh. It was a small Mirpur Khas village where one of our friends is based from. So this was the reason we went for this particular site, and this allowed us to get a more diversified opinion of what happens and what is the local technique that the people there use to build up their homes when they don't have enough money or resources. So again, it was a structure taking inspiration from the existing mud house that were already present on the site. They were generally using three main elements: mud, bamboo, and thatch. So thatch would provide a reinforcement in between the mud, and bamboo was basically the added as a structural support to the horizontal plane, which was the roof plane basically. So again, we took these traditional homes and also the wind catches that were present on the site, and we basically came up with these basic forms. And then these basic forms were then made into modular structures. And on that modular structure, for giving an entire overall scheme, we added a overlay safari roof that would give a more of a sun shaded program throughout.
Basically, if you look at Karachi or Pakistan as a region, the climate is mostly hot and arid throughout. There's not a lot of humidity in most of the areas except for the coastal region maybe. And so there's a lot of need to have these shaded spaces, these veranda spaces that are called over here to basically ensure, the climate is under control, it's manageable, and people can actually occupy these spaces and use these spaces in a very sort of flexible indoor-outdoor sort of situation. So for that, the idea was to create this sort of roof structure that sort of encapsulates all the circulation and intermediary spaces that are then used as spill out spaces or spaces where people sort of gather together.
Again, we need to also understand that the context of a village in Pakistan is such that these communal public amenity functions, the buildings that house these functions are used as something else during the evening. So during the evening, it could also be used as an event space. It could also be used to gather around, just have a chat, because these are very small populated areas, and the everybody knows everybody, so it's a very strongly knit community as well. So again, like we initially mentioned, the roof was made of 3-inch lime, and then it was added on with a layer of earth and 4-inch dia for reinforcements for planking. And the foundation was stone soling, the yellow stone, the gizri stone that was already present on the standard side, and then there was 4-inch dia floor beam and joist flooring. So the next is a commercial facade design. It was one of the furniture showrooms on main avenues of Karachi.
The idea for these projects basically came out of reusing some of the existing things that were available on the site. And the structure was existing on the site and it was revamped into a completely new sort of urban facade or an urban front, which became like a dialogue between the city and the structure. And the idea proposed over here was to layer multiple sort of metal and other material screens to sort of create this sort of transitional movement.
Again, the screen that you see, the client had a requirement. He had around 50 sheets of because he does a business of furniture, so he had these 50 sheets, and the idea was that use these sheets in your design method and to reduce the overall cost of the particular elevation. So again, the idea of sustainability that we've been talking about, again, the reuse of the elements and the reuse of the things that have been already used reduces the carbon footprint in overall. So this was the initial facade, and then we started off with the metal screen on the first layer, and then later on there was these CNC cut the screens that were out of cement board, and then the metal works on top of that. So it came out looking something like this, where we had this desert kind of a field leading you to this particular object, which was creating a connection with the open facade.
Again, the use of landscape over here is something which is very important in terms of the climate that we are in. There's not a lot of rain during this throughout the year basically, and you have to look at the fact that you have to go with the landscape which sort of is sustainable for the type of climate that we're living in. Other than that, we've been working on a few residential design projects as well, which have been based in multiple different areas of Karachi only at the moment. And so one of the projects was basically this 20,000 square feet residential scheme that we did for a client. And the overall idea again came from this traditional idea of courtyard houses, which is a very sort of regional feature which is present in most of the spatial layouts of old regional houses if you see in the city. And these courtyards basically become spaces to bring in light and ventilation into the livable spaces that are part of the overall daily use. And these courtyards actually become spaces to actually relax or recreate as well. So recreational spaces mostly based in these open spaces, while livable or sort of quarters are sort of all spacing towards these open spaces in order to create privacy, in order to ensure light and ventilation within these interior spaces. So there were multiple courtyards. One of them was used as a pool courtyard where you have this sort of interior sort of pool which is overlooked by all these interior spaces, and it becomes like a very private zone for the family to actually use during the day as well, during the hot climate especially. And then we sort of look at the idea of cladding the building with this sort of locally available stone slates in a pattern which allowed basically a sort of modular sort of approach to be used.
Again, also we would like to add that again there is an issue of a privacy, because people tend to have more private spaces. There are more family intimacy that is there in this part of the world, and they want to keep their activities much more private. So these courts also form like a layer to the outside world, where you have all of your activities, your close guests, your own particular families having these activities in these courtyards. And the secondary purpose was also the climatic conditions that allowed to create more shaded and more welcoming spaces. These images are during that of the construction process. So you could see a much difference in the construction techniques of what happens in the UK to what happens in Pakistan. So we have these bamboo scaffoldings instead of those metal scaffoldings, and you have these shutterings which are used as planks for making the plaster, for working on the block masonry. So we have these column beam structures, and then instead of bricks, or we use blocks which are bigger in size, where you can see in this particular image. And yeah. So again, this is an image of what was happening during construction. This is all the scaffolding that was being started to put around so that you can have plastered walls. And if you could see the entire image, this is our main entrance, and this is the courtyard that we were talking about. So you have an entrance to the courtyard from the interior of the house, and also from the exterior of the house through the staircase. This is the staircase that is leading you from the garden area. So this is the garden area to be the garden area. So we have this staircase leading you to the basement courtyard. So this courtyard was in the basement. It also increased the usability of the basement, because now it does not really look like a basement because you have the sunlight coming through. And this is the entrance to the house. So it's under construction still. And the same language is followed through the use of those stone slates. The next is a school design. The school property was rented by a client of ours, and again, the idea was that they don't want to touch much of the initial the structure that they got, and they wanted to have a more institutional look, and at the same time not construct too much on it and not touch the initial structure that was already present on the site.
So this is the proposal that we came up with using the idea of creating planes and volumes that interlock into each other and create a sense of play and a sense of intrigue for students who would be coming here throughout the day. So again, the palette was kept very neutral, and the idea of screens were introduced to create sort of a layering of a layer that could be added on to an existing structure which was present on site. We came up with this idea of using these colored screens to introduce a sense of play and a sense of visual sort of privacy, or a visual layer that could be added to sort of screen off the existing structure that was present over there. And then there were some requirements to add on some interior, to sort of work on some interior spaces as well. And one of them was the library space, which came into this atrium space within the central part of the school. And we decided to work with a very sort of natural palette of plywood, and using that as the main material to sort of come up with a very warm and a very inviting library space for students to.
So this is a picture of during the process. The screen was added, the color was made. It's still ongoing. It hasn't been completed yet, but this is just to give you an idea of what it's looking like right now to what it was looking like before. These screens was added. This was a play area for third and fourth and fifth grade, and behind this space was a play area for first graders and second graders. So there was also an interior and an exterior, and then a privacy factor, but at the same time it was one continuous space, because you could sit here, you could have a basketball event happening here, and then you have nursery kids playing to the back side of the screen. So now we have a small boutique design. Again, this was more of an elevation job, where we had this particular shop that the client came up with, and they wanted to go and represent their image as more of a traditional image, and they basically do bridal and basically bridal clothing. So this was our proposal for this particular shop. The idea was to create again a layer of construction, where there were arches present on the side, and then there was a layer of the black and gold and a bit of gray texture that was on the bottom of the entire elevation.
Again, to create a sort of a regional fusion between a regional and a very contemporary style of architecture, which basically reflected their sort of work ethics and work methods.
So this was a pretty interesting part, because this particular staircase became part of the design towards the very end, because we had two different requirements. One requirement was that you can't construct anything permanent here, and the second requirement was that they wanted the entrance to be from the front. So after a lot of alterations and a lot of trial and error, we came about with this steel staircase, which was basically removable. You could take it out, you could place it inside after the shop is closed. So this was pretty interesting throughout the project. So these were a few of the projects that we shared. There were a couple of commercial projects, a couple of residential projects, and 2 design competitions that we took part in. Apart from that, you're more than welcome to start off with the questions.
I mean, you've done my job for me. Questions, anybody?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I saw some of the projects like bamboo material. Some for structure, some for like decoration. So, is bamboo is a local material or not?
Bamboo is actually a very local material available throughout the rural areas of Pakistan. So that is something that is used very regularly throughout, even during the process of construction. So, for example, instead of using steel or metal reinforced scaffoldings, they sort of prefer to use bamboo scaffoldings, which are a more sort of traditional method of construction, and it's easy for them because that is something that they have been using in the past for a lot of time. So they have this sort of technique that they have developed over time, and that's why they prefer using bamboo instead of modern techniques or modern methods of construction sometimes in some processes.
Yeah, and another is for the like maintenance. Yeah, for one project I saw like perforated plain panel, like on the facade.
Yeah.
Yeah. For that project, like for this material, I don't know if for the local environment is easy to maintain or not, because some of this in China, one of thing is for the like maintenance things. One of thing is for the window. When it's being window, they may create like noisy. Like I don't know is for the local environment to have those issues or not.
Well, I mean, it does have some. You have to sort of look at the pros and cons of using the materials that you are working with. And so, whatever the limitations of the material are, you sort of try to deal with them during the process of construction. So, in terms of whether if it's a material that can easily be weathered, then you look at the possibilities of whether you can come up with a solution that sort of stops or slows down that process of aging throughout the time. So obviously, using those panels, we decided to actually coat them with a certain sort of and a surface coating that sort of allows it to be less maintenance free. And like you have this you have these extra layers that are added onto the material to sort of counteract all these issues that might arise later on. That's one thing. That's how you deal with it during the process.
Because in few projects, you're basically guided by the client. In this particular project that you're talking about, the idea was that the client owned a furniture design showroom, and he had these panels already present on as a roof element. So he wanted to reuse them and reduce his cost, and at the same time allow for a more efficient method, but instead of buying a new material and having more to spend on this particular project, he wanted to basically reduce the overall the overall carbon footprint and the overall cost of the project. So again, those limitations are also from project to project basis.
Okay. Yeah, and the last question is the one detail, and I saw many of your project like you like to make a gap between the wall and the ground. So is your like the main concept, or have some functional for this gap?
So if you're talking about what exactly you're talking about, you're talking about a form that has a gap or the planes that has a gap?
It's more of an aesthetic sort of solution that you come up with, and then you look at the possibilities of like those gaps are mostly there to sort of add on to the overall the aesthetics of the design. So it has a functional reason as well, because it sort of allows you to detach the floor level, the the building from the grade level, which then basically helps in maintenance and all of these issues as well. So that has a practical reason as well. But again, it's more towards what the aesthetics sort of require. So you work with those elements to create those design sort of features.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Some of my understanding, like some of the lighting had the gap can create like not straight lighting feeling. It can be refresh. Refresh. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? I think we'll just give it a few moments for the students to gather their thoughts, if that's okay.
Sure.
Can I ask a question? So you mentioned sustainability and local materials quite often. So I just wondered if that was something that really sort of was a key driver within your design process, or is that sort of just a key principle that you work with within your practice, or is it driven by the clients?
I think it's a combination of the circumstances that you're working with. So every project sort of comes with its own limitations. For example, the some of the projects that we're working in the rural areas, they require a more sort of sustainable approach because there is lack of resources, and you have to sort of work with whatever local techniques and materials people are sort of aware of or they have used over the years. So you have to work within those limitations. When you come to a more sort of urban setting, there is a possibility to look at sustainability in a very different way, where you can sort of use the general or the normally used materials, but then you look at sustainability in terms of how you deal with the climate in those regions. So, climate is an important part over here, especially in Pakistan. It's normally hot and humid in term or arid, depending on whether you're near the coast or away from the coast. So you have to tackle that hot climate throughout the year. So for that, you need to come up with passive or sort of active design sort of interventions or sort of techniques that can counter those. And that's the sort of sustainable driving forces that you use in the urban setting. And so it sort of varies between the setting that you're based in and the client that you're working for and the program that you're doing, depending on whether it's a residential design or whether you're doing it something for the local community. So it depends on that, I guess. It changes with the project or the kind of project it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question. If anybody else has one, now's the time. think maybe we should leave it at that. Thank you so much, Salman and Adnan, for your very interesting presentation. And obviously congratulations because you're doing quite interesting work after the course. So thanks for that. And it gives us all something to aspire to. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure, and we'd love to join in again sometime.
I'm sure that you'll be called on again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.